Hey everybody. Thanks for coming here. Yet again, I forgot to turn my stuff up. Here we go. We're live narrating on TikTok. So yesterday I was in the middle of chapter 23 and I didn't have time to finish it because I had an appointment. So I started a little bit early today so that I can finish this chapter and then hit my usual goal of an hour, which is about usually 3 chapters is what I like to hit. So we're going to finish yesterday's and do today. Hey there. Thanks for popping in, everybody. All right. Here we go. Let's get going on Mildred's Resistance, chapter 23. An awkward pause preceded his response.
Well, go ahead. I won't speak to someone I can't see, she said. I'd like to know who you are. Then we won't speak.
He made a movement to shut the door, but she jammed the toe of her boot in the gap before he could. It slammed against her foot, and she winced.
I'm on orders from Councilmember Stefan. So?
Of course Stefan's name wouldn't invoke any kind of respect. She couldn't stand him either. She hesitated before trying a different approach.
I'm just here to help. I know the leadership hasn't been what it should, and I want to change that. Help what? Help us pay taxes we can't afford, while letting us wallow in poverty with bad roads? What does this coven need?
His suspicious eyes stared at her for several seconds longer. Then the door opened to reveal a man whose broad chest was matted with tight black curls. Dried mud and soot coated a sad pair. Dried mud and soot coated a sad pair of breeches with holes in both knees. The smell of body odor drifted into the chilly air. Mildred took a steadying breath through her mouth. Good heavens. He smelled, and looked, as if he died and clawed his way back out of the grave.
My name is Mildred. I'm the new assistant to Councilmember Stefan. Congratulations. I don't have any...
I kind of stumbled over that one.
Congratulations. I don't have any problems except for you. Now leave. I didn't ask about you, she snapped, irritated to find her patience wearing thin so early in the day. I asked about your coven. You are the coven leader, aren't you?
He shrugged his meaty shoulders.
Sure. You don't know if you're the coven leader or not? There's no one else out here.
He gestured around with a paw-like hand. The icy branches of Leadham Wood spiraled out in gnarled fingers, creating an intricate gray web and not much else. A haunting stillness emanated from the quiet forest. Mildred wished she could bottle it up and take it back with her to the noisy castle.
Are there no witches in your coven? She asked. No. And what's your name? Bart. This, by all accounts, should be the Northeast Middle Coven, she said, motioning behind her. It's the smallest coven in the Middle Covens. Does that sound familiar? Sure.
Mildred pushed aside her frustration. What had she expected? No one knew her. She hadn't earned their trust, which meant she'd just have to take whatever they were willing to give.
Can I do something to help you, Bart? Is there something the network could help you with? Provide something that you're not getting now?
His heavy brow furrowed.
You can leave me alone. That I can do. I'll return in 6 weeks. Please send me a notice if you need any...
The door slammed in her face before she finished. Mildred lifted an eyebrow, studied the slats, and Sorry, I had a noise bubble up in my throat. Hey there. Mildred lifted an eyebrow, studied the slats, and returned to the carriage, unaware that Bart watched from the belly of his house as she climbed into the carriage and continued down the dirt road. Mildred rode through 5 villages, some small, some sprawling into towns, all while meeting the same distrust she'd seen in Bart. It wasn't until she passed a dead, bloated body on the side of the road and saw 2 young children with swollen bellies playing in a muddy ditch that she realized the extent of the poverty she dealt with. Most witches stared at her when she introduced herself. Some pointed her to broken-down buildings, where she'd find other witches that were no more helpful. She wrote copious notes and spoke with every witch that didn't run from her, but she found no real starting point. There weren't many coven leaders willing to step forward, and most villages or towns didn't want one.
How can I show them that change can be a good thing?
She thought as they passed a shack with chickens running out the front door. She turned to her scroll and started her 24th list while they rode to Stilton Coven. I paused in the middle of that sentence. I want to see how it sounds. Yeah, I don't like the pause, so I'm going to redo the sentence. She turned to her scroll and started her 24th list while they rode to Stilton Coven. By the time they arrived at Stilton, the most prosperous city in the Middle Covens, Mildred's bones ached, her hands were stiff with cold, and the tip of her nose shone as jolly red as a cranberry. The driver stopped at a 2-story house that had been converted into the Stilton Coven office, and Mildred came out funny. Stilton Coven office. And Mildred climbed free of the carriage. She had to knock twice before the office door opened enough for a small face to peer out at her.
"The Coven leader is busy,"
a squeaky voice said.
"Come back next week."
Mildred shoved her boot in the path of a closing door for the second time that day.
"Tell him to clear his schedule," she demanded. "I have business with him."
The small face turned out to be a young boy, no doubt hired to send people away. Mildred pressed into the office, recoiling the moment she entered. Thick, choking smoke filled the room, washing over her with a sulfuric smell that left a metallic taste in her mouth.
"Blessed be,"
she cried. Wait. Sorry, the cried sounded funny. That left a metallic taste in her mouth.
"Blessed be,"
she cried, waving a hand in front of her face.
"What is that stench?" "Medicine,"
the boy said, woozy and wide-eyed. Mildred stepped through the fog, using silent magic to open a nearby window. It groaned in protest, but moved upward.
"Where is the Coven leader?"
she asked.
"Where he always is."
The little boy motioned to the back of the room. Mildred marched forward, using magic to open every window as she went. The offensive odor poured outside, and the haze began to clear.
"Excuse me," she called. "Excuse me."
A witch with a paunchy belly, an overgrown beard, and a vapid, detached expression appeared from the mist. He lounged back on a chair and stared into moving shadows that only he could see.
"What's his name?"
Mildred asked the boy, who stumbled along next to her. She put a hand on his shoulder to keep him from falling.
"Carthage," the boy mumbled. "You won't fire me, will you?" "No."
She grabbed a scroll and whacked the lumpy, insentient man on the arm.
"Carthage, I command you to wake up."
He remained entrenched in his stupor. His muscles displayed no form of life. If he hadn't been puffing weakly on his pipe, which spewed an obnoxious blue smoke, she would have thought him dead.
"How long has he been like this?" "He's always like this."
Mildred snatched the pipe from Carthage's cracked lips. I forgot the S. I said Carthage cracked. Mildred snatched the pipe from Carthage's cracked lips and chucked it out the window. That sounded kind of funny. Didn't that sound kind of funny? Yeah, I pause at the Carthages when I do the cracked. Oh, hi everyone. Just want to say hi really quick while I've stopped. Thanks for hanging out here, you guys. So fun to have you. Okay, let's keep going. Mildred snatched the pipe from Carthage's cracked lips and chucked it out the window. He gave an annoyed little stir and his forehead puckered, but then he slipped back into vague dreams. Fool! She burst into a coughing fit. The 3 letters she'd sent sat on top of a pile of unopened envelopes. A roll of blankets lay across the floor. Hardened crusts of bread littered the pillow, and a few candle stubs sat on the desk. The rest of the 2-story office was a mass of dust.
"It's my guess he doesn't conduct much business."
The little boy shook his head, nearly falling from the effort. A flare of rage bloomed in her chest. A leader in such a deplorable condition. How could any witch figure out how to run a coven with such imbeciles in positions of power?
"Very well,"
she said, brushing off her hands.
"I'll take care of this."
She returned to the wide porch of the office to find a small queue of curious witches on the lawn. Everyone seemed to hold their breath as soon as she appeared. Behind her, the house leaked putrid smoke like water through a thimble.
"Is there anyone here who works with the Coven leader, or has in the past?"
she asked. Witches stepped out of the businesses lining the street to listen, but no one spoke up.
"Well?"
she called.
"Anyone?"
A man with unassuming brown eyes, a gentle face, and a groomed beard came forward from the apothecary across the street.
"I've worked with Carthage before,"
he said. Although quiet, his voice carried over the crowd.
"I'm the assistant apothecary."
Okay, so this guy, William, is actually kind of a key character. We're going to save his voice. I saved snippets of his voice for later. If any of my readers are listening, you will know him as Hazel's father, or Bianca's great-grandfather. Great? Yeah.
"What's your name?"
Mildred asked, taking a mental checklist of him. He stood tall and straight. He appeared clean. 3 things she'd seen little enough of I gotta redo that. I stumbled over little enough of. He stood tall and straight. He appeared clean. 3 things she'd seen little enough of in the past few hours.
William. Very well, William. What can you tell me about Carthage?
He glanced behind him as a striking woman with gray eyes and black hair stepped out of the apothecary.
We hardly see him, William said. Trying to get an appointment is impossible. Every now and then he'll leave to get a few supplies, but he often just ends up at the tavern or...
He motioned helplessly to the blue smoke spewing from the office.
And who are you?
Someone asked from... I kind of stumbled over that. I added like a lisp to the ask. Someone asked from the anonymity of the gathering crowd. Is it anonymity or anonymity? How do you pronounce anonymity? Anonymity. Anonymity. That's how. From the anonymity of the crowd. That sounds so weird. Doesn't that sound weird? Hey, Nachi, thanks for coming in. Anonymity. 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 From the anonymity of the crowd. That sounds weird. Someone asked from the anonymity of the crowd. You guys can't even. Sounds so weird. I gotta practice it. Someone asked from the anonymity of the gathering crowd. Asked from the anonymity of the gathering crowd. Okay, I'm gonna try it without laughing. Someone asked from the anonymity of the gathering crowd.
My name is Mildred. I'm the new assistant for Councilmember Stefan. I've come to introduce myself and discuss the needs of your coven.
We need food, a woman cried.
And jobs. And our common schools back.
A clamor of voices assaulted her.
Silence,
she called.
All of you. I'll take care of everything as best I can. In the meantime, I need a coven leader. William, how do you feel about taking over for Carthage?
His light brown eyes grew wide.
Take over?
The black-haired woman stepped to his side and put a hand on his shoulder. William calmed, as if her simple touch gave him physical strength. It would be an honor to serve our coven, she said. And that is Lily. Lily is Hazel's mom and Bianca's great-grandmother, which is just so fun if you know my books. Hey, everybody, who else is in here? Thanks for coming in. Oh, whoops. I always do this. Things get a little wonky. Okay, here we go. William looked to the woman with a questioning gaze. She smiled. He responded with one of his own, then turned to Mildred with a nod.
Yes, he said. My wife, Lily, and I will help in any way that we can. Thank you, Mildred said. Let's start with clearing that office out. You and you.
She pointed to 2 swarthy men standing nearby.
I'd appreciate you bringing Carthage out.
They stared at her, and she felt a momentary shock of fear. What if they didn't listen? What if they didn't respect her authority? Oh, hi, Sammy. I just saw your hearts. I just want to say hi. Hi. I hope you're doing awesome.
No, she thought. I will not fail. I failed at enough already. Well, she said, get to it. We have a lot to do and not enough time.
They hesitated a heartbeat longer, then started to the office together. She barely came to their shoulders when they slipped past her and disappeared inside.
You and you,
she said, pointing to a woman and a girl who appeared to be her daughter.
Do you have current employment? No, Miss Mildred, the mother said. Does someone clean this office? No. You're hired. Please start immediately. Record how many hours it takes you until it's spotless, and I'll personally pay your wages. Leave all the paperwork and business to William and his wife.
The 2 men struggled out of the house, holding Carthage by his chubby ankles and sweat-lined shoulders. His pinpoint eyes stared out at the crowd without comprehension.
Take him to the inn to let him sleep it off,
she said, gaining confidence with every passing moment. All it took was a show of authority.
The rest of you go home. I will return in 1 week to take your complaints and questions. Spread the word to your neighbors.
The stunned faces gradually fell away, but not for some time after she strode back into the office and began to throw things out the window. The mother and daughter tasked with cleaning reappeared. William, who wouldn't let his wife inside... Okay. William, who wouldn't let his wife inside a building with such foul air, joined Mildred, his shirt over his nose.
"Thank you for accepting," she said, straightening. "Let's get right to business."
As Stefan maintained no requirements of his coven leaders or high witches, Mildred devised her own to guide him.
"I want to report every 2 weeks on the state of the coven and current problems,"
she said while she paced back and forth across the front porch. He wrote her expectations down for the next half hour.
"And you shall be in charge of managing and communicating with the tax collectors."
By the time they left the office, which still reeked of stale eggs and tobacco, night had long since descended. Mildred's feet ached, her tired back felt cramped, and a dull headache throbbed at the base of her skull. They stood on the porch for a moment.
"Thank you for your help,"
she said. William locked the door behind him, but left some of the windows open to the chilly night so the building could breathe. I want to double-check that cadence. Yeah, I kind of stumbled. I saved the building. You can't maybe hear it right away, but in the recording you could. William locked the door behind him, but left some of the windows open to the chilly night so the building could breathe.
"Do you need a place to stay?" he asked. "Your driver is at the inn, I believe." "I'll transport back to the castle," she said. "Please tell him to return to Chatham in the morning. I shall be in touch within the next couple of days."
Without a farewell or word of explanation, Mildred transported back to her bedroom. She heated a small cauldron of water, peeled off her stinking clothes, scrubbed her skin and hair, and collapsed into bed to stare at the ceiling.
"It's done,"
she thought. The first challenge had passed, and she'd handled it tolerably well. She reviewed each part of the day in methodical, precise detail, noting further additions to her mental list of ways to improve. At the very least, she'd reached out, met the residents, seen the poverty, and removed a corrupt leader. For the first time in over a month as assistant, she felt like she might, with dedicated hard work, tolerate the job. Fortunately, she wasn't afraid of working. She fell into a deep sleep while thinking that life was never as straightforward as her plans, and wondering what Martin would have to say about that at dinner the next day. Never as straightforward as her plans, and wondering what Martin would have to say about that at dinner the next day. Perfect. It's such a fun chapter. Hey everyone, thanks for coming. Hey Holly, Lanisha. How do you say Enzio? Nazo? Lanisha, thanks. A fellow narrator. How fun is that? You guys are awesome. Oh, love, love, love. All the love. Okay. Narrators got to stay together, right, Lanisha? Okay. So we just finished chapter 23, which is really exciting because it almost puts us halfway through this project, which is good and sad. The next couple of chapters that we're going to do in the next hour, we should be able to finish. They're all about 2,500 words. They're a little bit shorter, so we should breeze through them really quickly, which is really fun. So I'm just going to write the tags and go on. I'm excited about this part of the book. This is some of my readers' favorite parts. Chapter 24, Bad News.
"I have some bad news to report, council member."
I'm going to redo that. There we go. Bad news.
"I have some bad news to report, council member."
May stood in front of Evelyn's desk, an envelope in hand and an unusually severe expression on her face. Evelyn glanced up, surprised that the buzz she felt when addressed as council member still hadn't faded after 6 months. Paperwork and correspondences surrounded her in an ocean of parchment and scroll. 4 separate quills kept active by complex magical incantations worked around her desk. One hovered in the air for lack of space. Ink dripped onto the floor, but she'd have the servants clean it up later. The beginnings of summer filled the room with stuffy warmth.
"What up?"
Sorry, I started the wrong accent and then I got a bug. Filled the room with stuffy warmth. "What's happened this time?" she asked, biting back another sigh. Where had all of these disasters come from? Evelyn couldn't recall this many problems when she'd served as the High Priestess's assistant. Then again, Nell dealt with a broader spectrum of issues, not these ridiculous tiffs between coven leaders and tax collectors. At this rate, it would take her 3 years to be efficient, or at least sleep a full night. The thought that perhaps she wasn't as ready to be council member as she'd believed filtered through her mind, but she pushed it away. Improving the network came at a definable cost, one she would pay.
"A report from the vineyards just came from Milton D'Angelo."
May handed an opened letter to her.
He owns the most profitable vineyard in Ashley and says there are rumors of riots breaking out amongst his workers.
Riots? Evelyn asked with a scowl, eyes still on a letter from Norbert, the head of finances, asking why they'd underpaid last month. The last thing she needed was a riot and underpaid taxes, so she would send the requested 30 pentacles to prevent Norbert from telling Donovan. Once she was in power, she'd get rid of corrupt witches like Norbert. In the meantime, she'd just have to tolerate him. What are they rioting about now?
The vineyards are only producing at 50% for the 3rd year in a row. Milton cut their wages so he didn't have to close the vineyard, and they're throwing a fit. A violent fit, of course.
Evelyn plucked the letter from May's hand and perused it. The handwriting was so sloppy she could barely make out the words.
Building discontent,
she murmured, only able to read in bits and snatches.
Low wages, workers angry, waiting outside main gates, requesting your presence.
The last line was clear enough.
I think you should go,
May said, folding her hands in front of her. She wore a dark gray dress with long fitted sleeves and a slight puff in the shoulder. The color drew attention to her blue eyes.
You know how the poor are, Evie. When irrational fear will escalate into a bloodbath. A threatened riot is as good as a violent one.
I'm going to re-listen to one of those lines really quick. Okay, sometimes I don't always hit my consonants at the end of a word. And I like to double check it.
Yes,
Evelyn said, pushing her hair out of her face at the grim thought.
To protect the innocents, we must get on top of the riots before they turn deadly. Exactly. I'm glad to hear such sense spoken from one in power. You prove your worthiness to hold your position time and time again. In 6 months, you still haven't lost your edge or forgotten your ideals.
The warmth of the compliment tingled through Evelyn's body. She stood, shucking off the papers in her way.
Well, May, let's go to the vineyard, shall we?
Milton D'Angelo was a short, fat man with a gray goatee that nearly reached the top button of his overcoat. He always wore a hat, and as far as Evelyn could ascertain, had never once touched a grapevine.
I bought the place 10 years ago,
he said, standing in the parlor. I'm gonna note his voice because I think I'm gonna need it later, but I'm not sure, so I always just err on the side of caution, and we have to restart anyway. Oh, thanks for the gift. You guys are so awesome. Thanks, Lanisha. You're gone, but thank you. You're awesome.
He said, standing in the parlor of his estate. The foreman Elijah runs the day-to-day work. Good with plants, you know. Grew up around grapevines. He's usually the go-between for me and the workers. Speaks their language, you know.
Evelyn murmured her agreement. May shot her a quiet, knowing look that Evelyn understood at once. Milton could be a supporter? She filed his name in the back of her mind. Milton D'Angelo was just the kind of wealthy witch that Evelyn would need to back her righteous cause. Wasn't he living the beginning of her nightmares? The rise of the poor against the I tripped over educated. The rise of the poor against the educated upper class that ran the network and supplied it with the ability and talent? All the more reason to subdue this ridiculous discontent. Not to mention the consequences of everyone finding out one of my covens rioted within my first 6 months, she thought, suppressing the need to fidget. She'd look incompetent if she couldn't keep things running smoothly her first year, and she was determined to prove her capability. D'Angelo's 4-story mansion sat behind endless fields of gnarled plants, stretching in lines until they met Leadham Wood in the distance. Evelyn sipped her tea, impressed by the interior decor of the parlor. Porcelain figurines of young women graced the shelves on the wooden walls. The air smelled like musty potpourri, and an elaborate, not elegant. I started to say elegant, but it's elaborate. And an elaborate rug from the Mills of the Middle Coven. The air smelled like musty potpourri, and an elaborate rug from the Mills of the Middle Covens covered the floor.
Tell me, Milton,
Evelyn said, carefully setting her teacup on the saucer and facing him with a warm smile. Your vineyards have fallen on hard times, have they not? His wrinkled old face fell.
Indeed, council member,
he said with a quiet duck of his head, as if they had just spoken of someone who had recently died.
A disease moved through my fields, and the foreman had to burn over half of the plants. I thought we'd recover this spring, only...
He trailed off, head shaking.
It wasn't meant to be.
Mildred. Mildred reached... Mildred... Oh my gosh, you guys. Ah. Milton reached for a pastry on the platter in the middle of a table with his chubby pincher fingers. Evelyn spotted the sparkle of a cufflink with a cluster of purple diamond grapes and wondered if Grant would like it. "I understand your frustration," she said. "And now all your workers are threatening to riot."
"I can't pay them the same I used to,"
he said, sounding desperate.
"How could I? We've only half the revenue coming in. I must save for the future, or else the vineyard will go under completely. So I fired some and cut the pay of the rest. They don't understand that I had to do it to keep running. It's a game of numbers, plain and simple. I simply can't afford to pay them more currency when I have none to give. If I were to keep operations running as they were before the blight, all of it would close and everyone would lose their jobs."
"And you've explained it to them?"
"Of course," he huffed. "A lot of good it did. Well, I suppose I didn't explain it, but Elijah said he'd talk to them. They just yelled at him about decreasing wages and feeding their children. I understand they're scared. I dare say I would be as well, but the numbers don't lie."
"No," Evelyn said. "The poor rarely do understand the economics of business. You can't be held responsible for the individual life of every worker."
"Exactly," he said in relief. "Though they expect me to, you know."
"Bearing the responsibility of leadership is difficult. To lead those that don't want to be led, to make them understand things outside their control, that's a terrible burden. What can I do to support you?" Milton's gaze had traveled outside and locked onto something across the way. He stood, finger pointing.
"There!" he cried. "You see? They're gathering in groups outside my house. I want them gone. I shan't pay them at all if they keep forming posses and riots. I'll fire them all and hire witches from the southern covens."
A queue of 10 witches had walked up to the wrought iron gate that separated Milton's yard from the rest of the vineyards. Evelyn's forehead wrinkled. I just want to redo that. Rest of the vineyards. Evelyn's forehead ruffled. They were a ragtag group, with dirty pants, old caps, and skin that looked as if it hadn't been washed in ages. Although they never touched the gate and made no move to do so, their very presence outside Milton's house was unsettling. I'm Rust. I said I'm Rust. There we go. I'll redo that. Their very presence outside Milton's house was unsettling. I must protect him and his life's work, Evelyn thought, rallying her courage. I must guard the D'Angelos from harm. I see exactly what you mean, Evelyn said.
Elijah says they want their jobs back, but I say that's madness. He proposed a tax break, but that's even more ridiculous. They still live on the land and use the roads, Milton said. Just because they make a sacred or two...
Yeah, sorry. I had a cough bubble up.
They still live on the land and use the roads, Milton said. Just because they make a sacred or two less doesn't mean they shouldn't have to pay for the same privileges I pay for, does it?
No, I agree with you, Milton. His chest huffed with a sigh of relief.
Good,
he said, and his voice softened to the weary tone of a grandfather.
I don't want to lose my vineyard because they demand I pay them currency I don't have.
Don't fear. Nope, that's Evelyn, not me. I don't know why Evelyn is talking.
Don't fear.
Evelyn. Oh, that is Evelyn. Sorry. I'm thinking of May. Don't fear, Evelyn said, standing. She moved closer to the window, but remained off to the side to stay out of sight. The network shall protect you, your family, and your interests. May, send a request for half a contingent of guardians to stand guard for the next 3 weeks. The shuffle of May rooting through her bag, and the sudden appearance of a quill in her hand, sounded in the quiet room while Evelyn paused, mapping out a plan. Specify that any witch participating in a riot or protest will be sent to the dungeons for a 1-year sentence.
Forgive my impertinence, council member, May murmured, but do you feel that is steep enough?
Get them off. Oh, that's Milton.
But do you feel that is steep enough? Get them off my land if they're going to hurt me, Milton called, shaking a fist at the window. I don't want them coming after my wife when I'm at the club, you know. What's 1 year? Look at them. They're trying to memorize the layout of my house so they can break in.
It was quite odd that they should just stand outside. There could be no innocent intent behind such a gesture. Swift, sure justice would be best. Evelyn sucked in a breath. You're right, she said. A life sentence. May nodded as Evelyn continued her instruction. Tell the guardians that they are to patrol the estate. Tell the guardians that they are to patrol the estate. Tell the guardians that they are to patrol the estate, break up any pockets of witches greater than 2, and report back to me if there are any problems. Milton D'Angelo swallowed another pastry.
Thank you, Council Member,
he said in relief, lifting a teacup from a silver platter. Let us just hope that the presence of the guardians will show them how serious we are. They'll move on, I hope. Milton agreed with a nod. I said Milden, not Milton. They'll move on, I hope. Milton agreed with a nod.
You've saved my family, my home, and my vineyard today. I shall forever be in your debt.
Evelyn smiled. It felt wonderful to finally make a difference. Once Evelyn returned to Chatham Castle, an array of garden parties and late-night social events captured her attention. She gratefully put Milton D'Angelo's vineyards out of her mind, feeling good about her decision to imprison the rioters, and didn't think of them again for 3 weeks.
It's quite hot today.
That sounded funny. It was a little too raspy for May.
It's quite hot today,
May said from her desk, where she lounged against her seat. A fan hovered in the air, waving back and forth, cooling her flushed cheeks. Evelyn set aside a stack of paperwork and straightened herself. Her back, not far back. Thanks, guys. Her back ached from slouching over her desk. She drank a sip of cool water, though the ice shipped all the way from the southern covens had already melted, leaving the glass... Sorry, I stumbled over that quite a bit. I'm just going to redo it. Evelyn set aside a stack of paperwork and straightened herself. Her back ached from slouching over her desk. She drank a sip of cool water, though the ice shipped all the way from the... Oh my gosh, that is a mouthful. She drank a sip of cool water and straightened herself. Her back ached from slouching over her desk. She drank a sip of cool water, though the ice shipped all the way from the southern covens had already melted, leaving the glass sweating and wet. Blasted summer, she muttered, lifting the hair off the nape of her neck. A wave of brutal heat moved into her office when the door to the hall opened and closed, momentarily overriding the spell that Evelyn had used to cool the room. Council member? A tall, strapping young man with brown hair and eyes set in a tanned face. Who's this guy? Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't remember this character, and so I'm not sure how to voice him. But now I remember. Okay. Council member? A tall, strapping young man with brown hair and eyes set into... No, this is Jordan. Right? Hold on. I have to scroll ahead because this might be... No, it can't be him. Okay, I thought it might secretly be another character, so I'd have to use his voice, but it's not. It can't be. Council member? Sorry, there we go. Council member? A tall, strapping young man with brown hair and eyes set in a tanned face stepped into the room. Something vaguely familiar lingered in his solemn expression and brisk, militaristic manner, though she couldn't place it exactly. The insignia on his chest indicated he was a captain of the guards. The initials J.G. sat beneath the insignia. Yes? She asked. May peered over the rim of her glasses with disinterest before turning back to her paperwork. 3 weeks ago, my contingent was assigned to protect Milton D'Angelo's vineyard in the Ashley Covens. I've come to report. She brightened. Of course. How many people did you imprison? 3. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. Why so few? We observed no problems during our 3-week stay, he said instead of answering her question directly. He paused, and his lips moved as if he'd just run a tongue over the front of his teeth. There must have been, or you wouldn't have arrested 3. What did they do? A definitive, not definite. What did they do? A definitive uneasiness lingered in his steely gaze. Those we apprehended were drunk and didn't even know where they were. They didn't deserve imprisonment for being drunk, but we followed your orders. At least they are put away for life so Milton can sleep easier. And how is the D'Angelo family and estate? Safe. 2 guardians will remain for the next week to ensure his safety. Milton was smoking a cigar on his porch and eating eclairs when I left, council member. How many riots? None. None? He nodded to affirm it, his hands folded behind his back. There were no rumors of riots either. She looked back on her original meeting with Milton with regret. The presence of the guardians had scared the poor away. They'd apprehended none of the rioters, which meant they were still free to make trouble. She should have had those hooligans outside the estate arrested while she was there. Next time, she'd act much more decisively. Goodness, she thought. The strange lessons. The strange lessons. Let's try that again, without the lessons. Next time, she'd act much more Goodness, she thought. The strange lessons I must learn. What of Elijah? She snapped. He's their leader, isn't he? Milton seems to trust him, but I don't. I met and spoke with Elijah at length during my time there. He's a good witch, the captain said, chin tilted high. He cares for the workers that he takes responsibility for, and fears for their future. He also cares about his own job and would never defy his boss. She would have protested, but found his follow-up sufficient and was too hot to address his unsolicited opinion. I see, she said. Well, that's very disappointing. Disappointing? I was hoping you would make the Ashley Coven safer for those of us under attack. Okay, so there's a description of a cutting tone, but I didn't have that, so I'm going to redo it so she's a bit more cutting when she speaks. I was hoping you could make Ashley Coven safer for those of us under attack, she said in a cutting tone. A vision of Mama's red hair flashed through her mind. She felt a distinct sense of failure. She hadn't really protected Milton and his family, had she? She'd simply scared away a mob for now. No doubt they'd react violently once the guardians were gone. Next time I'll let them riot, and we'll round them up for good, wipe out their chances of getting away, she thought. Forgive me for saying so, council member, but the D'Angelo vineyards have nothing to fear from the workers. Milton may have perceived a threat that wasn't. Do not presume to tell me where the threats are or are not. Your job is to do as I say. You've completed the mission, though not to my liking, and I shall report it. Dear. Mission, though not to my liking, and I shall report it to Dolph. Hopefully this will help you improve in the future. The captain drew himself taller with an indifferent gaze. He paused, mouth open, then, deciding not to voice his thoughts, said, Understood, council member. You're dismissed. He gave a slight bow and departed without another word. Whatever he left unsaid lingered, nudging at Evelyn. She should be satisfied that violence had been prevented, and she was. So why did she feel a sense of letdown that someone hadn't been brought to justice? You scared the rioters, May said as soon as the door closed behind him. But they'll be back once the guardians are gone. Mark my words, don't let your defenses down. Evelyn clenched her jaw. This was one fight she wouldn't lose. I agree. Will you please send a message to Grant? I'd like to have lunch with him today. He's been avoiding me, and I want to find out why. Awesome. Okay, that was the end of chapter 24. We're going to go right into chapter 25 of Mildred's Resistance. I just have to write the stem. Mildred's Resistance, chapter 25. It is called You're Fired. Let me see. Oh, hey everyone there. Chapter 25. You're Fired. Despite the sticky humidity in the council room, Stefan fell asleep shortly after he sat down. Mildred fanned herself with an old piece of parchment, her cheeks bright red. Even with a dozen active incantations quelling the heat, it still felt miserable. Since there seemed to be no way to get rid of the room... To rid the room, not get rid of the room. Since there seemed to be no way to rid the room of the hot summer air, they all suffered in painful silence. I hope this goes quickly, Mildred said under her breath. Stella, who sat at her left as always, agreed with a low murmur. The previous Esbot had lasted an interminable 3 hours, and now they'd advanced into the second month of summer. All right, so now we've got Donovan, who I just want to listen. To the new assistant to the High Priestess. Okay, so I just listened to a snippet so I can accurately do his voice. Middle Covens, Donovan called from the wide chair tailored for his expansive bottom. Sweat streaked. Donovan called from the wide chair tailored for his expansive bottom. Sweat streaked the sides of his face. The head of finances reports that you underpaid network taxes by 23,000 pentacles last month. Explain yourself. That was kind of a loud explain yourself, and it peaks on the pleth, so I'm going to redo it.
Explain yourself.
An unsuccessfully stifled yawn distorted his voice. Oh, I hate it when I have those. I do this to myself, but I put the descriptions later, and then I have to go redo it.
Explain yourself.
An unsuccessfully stifled yawn distorted his voice.
We apologize, Your Highness,
Mildred said, having braced for his accusation. The head of finances sent her a message earlier that week, warning her that he'd tell Donovan about their tax deficiency unless she paid him 30 pentacles. She'd burned the letter and prepared herself for the worst, refusing to give in to his corruption.
We only collected enough to pay 7,000 pentacles. That's not even half.
Yes, she said, nostrils flaring as she suppressed a snide comment on his ability to do math.
Their crops are still growing and not yet ready to sell.
She'd been. Not that it really matters, but... She'd been Stefan's assistant for 8 months now, and a more tempestuous 8 months had never been experienced, which meant she'd faced Donovan in the Esbot 8 times, and she still couldn't stand him. Every month brought a new struggle between them. She'd finally accepted that they would never like each other.
Taxes in the farming covens are 1 pentacle per family.
Per family member, not per family. She finally accepted that they would never like each other.
Taxes in the farming covens are 1 pentacle per family member per month, he cried. It's not that much to ask. Most witches only make 1 sacred for a full day's work,
Mildred replied in frustration.
With 5 sacreds to a pentacle, an entire week of work goes to taxes for each person in a family. The cotton farmers with more than 2 or 3 children barely make enough to eat, even with both parents working. That's not...
Oh, Eddie. Hold on. Councilmember Eddie piped up. We don't have a voice for Eddie, so I'm gonna have to put him on here. I don't think I use him again, but we'll see.
That's not Donovan's fault, Councilmember Eddie piped up. If they can't afford to feed their children, they shouldn't have them.
Which is a real jerk. Ooh. We also have Rand next, and I can't remember him, so I'm going to listen to his voice.
What are you doing here?
I think he has kind of an eager voice.
What are you doing here?
So Rand's going to say,
miserable wretches make excuses for everything.
Sounds good enough.
Miserable wretches make excuses for everything, Rand muttered. The poor breed like lice, don't they? Then they expect the rest of us to take care of them.
Mildred's sensitive temper flared when Evelyn smiled slyly at Eddie and Rand, as if they shared a secret. Their growing elitist attitudes frightened Mildred far more than facing Donovan without enough currency, and she wondered if Eddie was the originator of the movement.
Yes,
Donovan said, brightening at the small group of supporters rallying around him.
Witches do make excuses, don't they? The Middle Covens has 30,000 residents. 30,000 pentacles is a fair task. How am I supposed to run the network with so little currency coming in? You could start by closing Ashley House, your personal retreat built by the exploitation of the poor, Mildred thought, but she schooled her emotions into apathy. 7,000 is twice what we were able to get last month, which means we are slowly improving. We've had to replace and train coven leaders and tax collectors.
Donovan's eyes bulged.
You only posted 3,500 pentacles last month.
Mildred's heart nearly stopped. What a foolish mistake. Of course Donovan hadn't looked back to previous months. She'd erroneously assumed the head of finances would have told him all their indiscretions.
Too late,
she thought, forcing a fearless facade by squaring her shoulders and meeting his irate gaze. Yes. Stefan hadn't moved an inch at her side, but regarded her with the same open astonishment as everyone else. She could almost feel him yelling at her in his head.
Why didn't you just pay off the head of finances like everyone else?
As of 8 months ago, the Middle Covens had fallen under her leadership. Though she wasn't council member on paper, she'd answer for every failure of the covens.
Yes?
Donovan bellowed.
That's it? You aren't going to give me an explanation? I tried, but you ignored it.
Donovan flipped a hand at her.
Get out of here! You're fired! You can't even get taxes paid!
Mildred's breath stopped in her throat. Stella made a noise of shocked protest, but remained in her seat.
You're firing me for telling the truth?
Mildred asked, unable to stop herself. Donovan's eyes narrowed again. Evelyn shook her head frantically back and forth, while Stella pinched her leg under the table.
Mildred!
she hissed from behind her hand.
"Are you crazy? You can't speak to the high priest like that." "I'm firing you because you're a failure,"
Donovan yelled, mopping his sweaty forehead with a sleeve.
"And impertinent at that. Leave immediately."
Mildred opened her mouth to speak, but Stella grabbed her elbow and jerked her down into the chair. To her great surprise, Stefan slammed his hands on the table.
"No,"
he yelled.
"No."
He used the table to brace himself, slowly standing on knobby, trembling knees.
"You can't fire my assistant,"
he cried, bushy eyebrows knitted together.
"She works for me, not you. I'm the high priest. I can do whatever I please." "No, you can't,"
Stefan said.
"I'm tired of teaching assistants how to do their job, and I refuse to get another one. Of course she didn't get all the taxes. Do you want to know why? Because I keep losing assistants."
He rapped the table with his large knuckles.
"Do you take responsibility for her?"
Nope, that wasn't. I gotta change it so he's not so. Hold on. I gotta find it. There we go. Donovan and Stefan actually have fairly similar vocals, so I have to be very careful with them.
"You take responsibility for her?"
Donovan asked, mirroring Mildred's shock. Stella's grip had loosened, and even Evelyn and Grant were listening with rapt interest. Stefan hadn't taken responsibility for anything in years.
"No,"
Stefan yelled.
"I don't like her either, but she's the only one that's collected even a quarter of the required taxes. Maybe you weren't paying attention, but we haven't paid 7,000 pentacles in taxes for almost 2 years. Why? Because all of the assistants left it a mess. Jikes, Donovan! When you took over the Southern Covens, you underpaid taxes for the first year. You even borrowed from the network to pay your workers. The Middle Covens didn't even ask for currency."
Donovan sank into a distant memory for nearly a minute while an uneasy silence reigned. Stella's head whipped back and forth between them, so fast she nearly hit Mildred with flying locks of hair.
Yes, perhaps."
Donovan wriggled in his chair and wiped sweat from his eyes. Beneath the tense exchange, the Reuven and swiped sweat from his eyes. Donovan wriggled in his chair and swiped sweat from his eyes. Beneath the tense exchange, the room felt even more like a baking oven.
"If you fire her, she's under no obligation to remain behind and explain what she's done for the Middle Covens, and my memory is terrible."
Stefan wagged a long finger.
"I can't guarantee you won't get taxes for the next 6 months if either of us go." "I hadn't thought of that." "Do it. Fire us,"
Stefan said.
"I dare you. The Middle Covens will really fall apart, you'll not get taxes, the textiles won't get made, and then you won't be able to get any clothes or cotton."
Mildred held her breath while Donovan glared down at them.
"Fine,"
he shouted.
"Assistant Margaret." "Mildred,"
she retorted.
"Whatever. You may stay, but only because it would be less convenient to fire you. I better have the full tax by the end of the year. You hear? The end of the year. Leadhamwood Covens, report."
Stefan collapsed into the chair with a growl. Mildred sat back, dazed and a bit shaky. Had Stefan, of all witches, just saved her job? She thought of thanking him, but stopped. He'd insulted her, too. He only wanted to keep her so he wouldn't have to work. Mildred pulled a fresh scroll and a quill and redirected. I almost said recharted, but it's redirected. So he wouldn't have to work. Mildred pulled out a fresh scroll and a quill and redirected her attention to taking notes, as if nothing unusual had happened. Stefan leaned back, folded his hands across his middle, and promptly fell back to sleep in the miserable heat. After the Esbot, Mildred set her bag on the far edge of Stefan's desk and leaned against it with a deep sigh. Her dress clung to her sweaty body when she waved the window open with a spell, but it did little to relieve the heat. Mildred spoke a wind incantation, and the slightest breeze cooled her skin a bit. Stefan hobbled to his chair, muttering under his breath as he moved.
"Thank you,"
Mildred said, breaking a stretch of stillness. He glanced at her from the corners of his eyes, made a harumph sound, and propped his cheek on his hand to stare at the empty fireplace.
How did you know what to say to Donovan? Mildred asked. I know Donovan, Stefan retorted with annoyance that filtered away as he spoke. I've worked with him for years. He's lazy now. He wasn't always, but he injured that damn knee. Sometimes in politics, you have to turn what you know against people. You learn where they're weak and you use it. Mildred sat on the chair across from him. Sounds barbaric, she said with a frown. Deliberately seeking out a weakness to exploit later. It's politics. You think I became council member by sitting around and letting assistants do all the work? I used to be busy. I used to take care of things. His words echoed through the empty air. Used to. I suppose you've taught me something tonight, she admitted grudgingly. As far-fetched as it sounded, Stefan had helped her career for once instead of hindering it. Politics aren't logical, he said. That's your problem. You're trying to put it in a box that you can mold, but you can't. When you work in politics, you work with witches, and witches aren't predictable. Half of them are crazy anyway. You can't control them, so stop trying. Present company included, she wanted to add. I'll remember that, she said after thinking over his conclusion. The logic made sense. While she didn't like to think of a chaotic world that didn't involve... that didn't involve... See, consonants, I'm telling you. The logic made sense. While she didn't like to think of a chaotic world that didn't involve the safety of rationality, and she was uncomfortable with the idea of exploiting another witch for gain, she couldn't deny the truth of his words. Perhaps there was a grain of truth beneath the way Evelyn worked, too. Once again, Mildred found herself questioning what she believed. How was one supposed to navigate such an uncertain and tempestuous sea? Stefan glowered from beneath his bushy white eyebrows. Just get the taxes straightened out before the end of the year. She'd have 4 months to pull 30,000 pentacles out of the starving, work-weary middle covens. It had taken her 8 months just to get 7,000 steady pentacles. She was tempted to ask Stefan how they'd managed before she came, but she held back. Likely it had something... Likely. Sounds like I said lightly. Likely it had something to do with bribes, corruption, and chosen blindness. It didn't matter now. They would move forward. The taste of her swallowed pride thickened her throat. I can't do it alone, she said, folding her hands on her lap. I need your help. Perhaps we can break our impasse tonight and agree to work together more amicably. Obviously you can't do it yourself. He rolled his eyes. Or else I wouldn't have had to bail you out. Are you going to help me or not? You know the Middle Covens better than anyone. New, he said with a hint of regret. Stefan closed his eyes. I don't know anything anymore, and I haven't cared since He stopped, and his entire body went rigid, though his eyes still flickered with pain. The portrait of his dead wife that hung above the fire drew both their gazes. Stefan had once mentioned his family in the time she had worked with him. Hadn't once. I think I said had once. Stefan hadn't once mentioned his family in the time she had worked with him. She realized with a start that his gritty personality hid nothing but a lonely, frightened old man. I'll get started on the taxes in the morning, I suppose, Mildred said, arms folded tightly across her chest. But how? The new, trustworthy coven leaders would help, but she still had to train half of them. Then came the not-so-simple matter of collecting crime reports, answering pleas from head witches, dealing with failed crops, and increasing the output of the mills. 3 piles of tottering envelopes. I usually say envelopes. And increasing the output of the mills. 3 piles of tottering envelopes awaited her attention. And that didn't even include planning her lessons for the staff 3 times a week. I've failed to do this job well so far, she thought. That's the simple matter of it. While Evelyn and Stella press forward with confidence in their careers, I'm still floundering to figure out how to be an assistant after 8 months. I can't even get my council member to help. 1 hour, Stefan said, startling her from her thoughts. I'll give you 1 hour of my time after breakfast before my nap. And 1 hour after lunch, she said. Ungrateful witch, he muttered. Fine, I'll give you 1 hour after lunch as well, but you have to make sure my meals arrive on time. Buy me a new pair of slippers to wear around the office. I get chilly in here. Make sure I have a fresh pile of books, too, and cookies on the plate at all times. Relief rippled through Mildred's chest, although it felt more like desperation. She'd forget her pride and pamper him the way he wanted. Perhaps he missed the way his wife had taken care of him, if he helped her.
She'd stuff his face full of chocolates if they could meet Donovan's 30,000 pentacle requirement.
Agreed.
He made another sound in the back of his throat, closed his eyes, and promptly fell asleep while Mildred transported to the library, seeking a fresh stack of gardening books and a recommendation on where to buy slippers. Sweet. All right, that concludes that chapter. We have like 20 minutes left, so I'm going to keep going. Oh dear, I've missed a lot of people. Sorry. We're going to do one more. I think this is wonderful is the next one. It's actually the shortest one we're doing today. So that means we should be able to finish completely. And I think if I remember right, this is a really sweet chapter. I think someone has a baby, if I remember right. Here's chapter 26. Chapter 26. This is wonderful. The comfort of a predictable schedule and figuring out how to do her job, thanks to Stefan's new involvement in Coven business, felt like loosening a corset. Mildred took her first real breath in years. Forward movement in her life had never felt so wonderful, even if it rolled on the wheels of meetings, paperwork, and caring for Stefan while also doing most of his job.
I'm leaving early today,
Mildred announced on the warm summer evening of her 25th birthday. She set a vase of fresh flowers from the gardens on the windowsill, rearranged them so two... Okay. On the windowsill, rearranged them so two of the same color weren't side by side, and stepped back to survey her work with a satisfied nod. A beautiful birthday gift from Martin.
The reports from all Coven leaders were in on time this month, which means I'm giving them a luncheon. Coven leaders were in. Which means I'm giving them a luncheon in Hampstead as a thank you.
She knew he didn't really care, but saying it out loud helped her feel accomplished. Stefan waved her out from behind his book and grunted. That's kind of an odd sentence. Oh, he's telling her to go. Okay.
Your dinner is ordered and will arrive at promptly 6,
she said, tucking the blanket in around his legs, despite the uncomfortable warmth in the room.
I ordered the steak with
extra, not and extra gravy. Hey, everybody.
I ordered the steak with extra gravy, just the way you like it, and a separate container of salt so you can season your own potatoes.
His cup of milk remained full, kept cold by a spell from a grimoire Mildred found in the library a few weeks before. If it warmed at all, he would send her a message demanding she return and bring him a new glass. A stack of scrolls on the best method of growing annuals waited at his fingertips, and a plate of cookies rested within reach. He reached for one and left a trail of crumbs on the pages of his current read, Growing Grass in the Southern Covens. It held his rapt attention. Mildred had gone all the way to a library in the Eastern Covens to find a book he hadn't read yet. With one last glance to make certain he had enough firewood for the evening, Mildred grabbed her bag and slipped into the hallway without a word. After being cooped up inside all day, she'd left enough time in her schedule to walk to the tea house for their annual birthday tradition. Stretching her legs and inhaling the crisp tint in the air that signaled the impending autumn. Okay. I need to change the cadence of that sentence so it flows a little better. Stretching her legs and inhaling the crisp tint in the air that signaled the impending autumn felt like the most glorious birthday present of all. She arrived on the exact minute she'd planned.
Happy birthday to me,
she murmured with a pleased smile. Nothing felt as satisfactory as arriving on time. A little bell on the door chimed when she stepped inside, welcoming her to the quaint shop that still smelled faintly of glue. Charles and his wife waved from behind the counter. Charles. All right, this character Charles is a minor character, and I'm pretty sure he just had a really deep Chatham City accent, so we're just going to go with that. I think the continuity will be fine.
It's all yours, Miss Mildred,
he said, hailing her with an uplifted hand.
Cake is just about ready, and you're the first one here. A bit early, aren't you? Yes, I have some letters to read before Stella and Evelyn arrive. Thank you, Charles.
She started up a narrow set of stairs in the back corner. The square table by the window of the second floor awaited her with a pot of iced tea, 3 cups, a bottle of wine for Evelyn, and small plates for the cake. The window had just been cleaned, giving her a pristine view of the sunset and the bustle of Chatham City below. Mildred sat down, let out a contented sigh, and pulled out Jordan's latest letter. All right, Jordan is her brother, so I'm just going to check his voice really quick.
Millie, I've joined the Guardians.
Okay, so he has a very easy, sturdy, intentional kind of cadence that I remember pretty well.
Dearest Mildred, I received your letter and apologize for not returning it sooner. I'm a lax brother. My latest assignment in Ashley has kept me busy, but no, that's not entirely true. Are you ready to hear the truth? Of course you are. You're always prepared for anything.
Mildred read the words with a rueful chuckle. Jordan always had a great deal more faith in her than she had in herself.
This is the truth, sister. I'm madly in love. I met a girl named Imogen while on patrol last fall, and I can't tear myself away from her. She's poor and has worked the vineyards her whole life. Her father is a man named Elijah and runs the D'Angelo vineyards. I love her. Luckily, I should be stationed in Ashley for the next 6 months, so she and I can spend all the time together we want. I plan on teaching her to transport, as she doesn't know how, to make it easier for us to be together when I do leave. She's wonderful, Mildred. Quiet, but incredibly smart and learns fast. I know you'll like her. I plan on marrying her. I'll send you notice of when, for you must be there. I could never marry without you at my side. Your brother, Jordan. P.S. Happy 25th birthday, dear sister.
Mildred read it twice before folding the letter together in relief. Knowing that Jordan had someone to love released a burden of worry she felt for him. Whether the girl was rich or not didn't matter a bit, so long as she would be good to him. So I have to pause here, because if you've been watching or listening to this whole thing, I was stumbling over that part in the vineyards when Evelyn's there and a captain comes in and there's J and G, I think, on his insignia. I'm pretty sure that was Jordan, Mildred's brother, and that's why I stopped. I'm like, wait, is this Jordan? No, it isn't, but it was. So it was Jordan. So Mildred's brother was the captain assigned to that part of Ashley, and then he falls in love with Elijah's daughter. So this is a really fun connection that readers of the story like. Also, for those of you that follow my works and stuff, if you've read the Network series, then Jordan and his wife play a role in Mildred's story much later it's written in all of my short stories. So it's a really fun connection. The world of Alcara is very vast and deep. It kind of comes together in a lot of ways. And some of these small Easter eggs are really, really fun to voice. Anyway, we'll keep going.
I want to be a council member one day, but I don't want to do it at the expense of living.
Nope, that was wrong. This is supposed to be Mildred remembering Stella saying this, so I got to revoice it in Stella's voice.
I want to be a council member one day, but I don't want to do it at the expense of living.
Stella's voice called from the depths of her memory.
I could never be high priestess. Forbidden from marrying? What about children? What about family? No, I shall live my life and have a career.
First Stella, now Jordan, would settle into a family life, something Mildred still had difficulty comprehending. Was there something wrong with her? She couldn't help but wonder if the assumptions she'd carried around about careers and marriage were wrong. Could she be brave like Stella and Jordan and give herself permission to love? The very idea tightened her chest. But then Martin's warm hazel eyes and thick eyelashes swam through her mind. She associated no panic or fear with him, just calm strength. Hadn't she already fallen in love? Emotions don't always have the rampant grip over rationality I imagined, she thought. She lost herself in a rare moment of daydreaming, imagining herself in a quiet little cottage with Martin at her side. Jordan would visit whenever he wanted, and she could pursue teaching. She felt more alive when she taught. No busy castle, no messages awaiting her immediate attention, no meetings or taxes or forced social interaction. For the first time in her life, she wondered if the path of council member on which she'd adamantly decided as a little girl wasn't actually the best path after all. Being with Martin and teaching does sound wonderful, she thought ruefully. But to change? To alter every expectation? She was good at running the middle covens. She knew, without a shred of arrogance, that she was skilled at leadership. But she didn't love it, wasn't passionate for it. Paperwork and messages and meetings didn't give her the same buzz of life that teaching did. Millie? She caught a glimpse of Stella's baby blue eyes in her peripheral vision. Stella's forehead furrowed in concern. Oh, I'm sorry. Have I interrupted your private time? No, Mildred said, grateful for a distraction from her unexpected. Mildred said, grateful for a distraction from her unexpected thoughts.
You're fine. Please have a seat.
Stella sat across from her with a weak smile.
Evelyn should be here soon. I sent her a message this morning, but I haven't heard back. The Ashley Covens are keeping her quite busy. I received a letter from her yesterday when she canceled our lunch meeting.
Stella didn't respond, staring at the cup and saucer in front of her without making a move to pour. Mildred set her cup down and waited. When a span of silence stretched for several minutes, she asked,
Is something bothering you, Stella?
Stella lifted her luminous eyes to Mildred. What is this? Oh, I think TikTok requires me to prove I'm a human.
Can I tell you a secret?
She implored, wrapping her hands around each other and setting her elbows on the tabletop.
I have something on my mind, and it's heavy. You may. I'm pregnant.
Mildred's heart stuttered.
Oh, I'm so confused,
Stella cried, putting her face in her hands.
I'm so excited and so happy and so scared and so sad that I don't even know what to think. I don't even know what to feel.
Mildred searched for an appropriate reply, but her brain seized. She'd never known how to say the right thing at the right time, and she'd rarely felt the burden of comforting more strongly than right then.
Stella, this is wonderful.
Yes, it is, she said from the muffled cave of her hands.
But it's also frightening. What if I'm not good at it? What if I'm not happy being a mother? What about my career? I don't even know what to think anymore.
Then don't think, Mildred replied, although she would never have taken her own advice.
Just go from here and do what you can. I have to think about it. I can't stop thinking about it. Oh, Mildred, how complicated life gets.
Stella pulled away from her hands and stared out the window. Tears clung to her eyelashes.
Have you told Dale?
No, Stella whispered, her eyes welling up again.
Not yet. He's on a month-long mission and returns in a week. I wanted some time to think everything over, but perhaps you're right. Maybe I am thinking too much. Rand is going to fire me. I just know it. All my hard work will be for nothing. Your 5-year contract is up in the spring,
Mildred said, grateful to switch to something concrete and less emotion-laden.
You must be due around then anyway, right?
Stella perked up a bit.
Yes,
she said, wiping at her eyes.
Yes, I am. I believe I'm due on the 3rd month.
Not on. I'm due the... Hey, everybody.
Yes, I am. I believe I'm due the 3rd month of winter, and my contract is up on the 1st month of spring. Rand doesn't have to know yet,
Mildred said, relieved to find a vein of logic to travel.
Talk to Dale about what he thinks and see how you feel. Maybe you can work up until you deliver and fulfill the contract instead of leaving early. Fulfilling the contract will certainly look better on your resume. Of course, leaving Chatham Castle may mean you never get back in.
I don't know if I liked that cadence. It was a little bit too quick for Mildred.
Of course, leaving Chatham Castle may mean you never get back in.
The cold, hard truth, while unsympathetic, had the intended effect. Okay, that cadence isn't great too. I thought it was a separate sentence, but it's commas. The cold, hard truth, while unsympathetic, had the intended effect. Stella's labile emotions ebbed, at least for the moment. Her crumpled face straightened.
You're right, Mildred. You always are, aren't you? I like to think so. I could cry all day,
Stella said, the tears returning. Her voice hardened, becoming resolute.
But I won't. I can't.
You're having a baby, Mildred said in a dry tone.
You're not dying.
Uncertain of what to do, and knowing there was nothing she could say that would change the situation, Mildred reached out and put her hand on top of Stella's. Stella swallowed and gave her a teary smile.
It's going to be okay, Stella. Thank you.
A message fluttered between them. Appearing. Okay.
Thank you.
A message fluttered between them, appearing with little more than a pop to announce it. Mildred's forehead scrunched, recognizing Evelyn's handwriting. She tore it open and read aloud. Very busy today. The Ashley Covens just can't function without my leadership, you know. These poor people are overrunning my vineyards. Save me a slice of cake. The part with the number. E. Stella's eyes widened.
She's rarely too busy to come for our birthday tradition. Except for when she went to the opera with Grant instead,
Mildred said with a roll of her eyes.
I'm not quite sure what to make of Evie anymore.
Evelyn's absence wasn't what bothered Mildred the most. Truth be told, Mildred wasn't in the mood to deal with Evelyn's mercurial emotions and strong opinions. But the line, "These poor people are overrunning my vineyards." Oh, it should be overrunning. Sometimes I cut the G, but that's a different accent. "These poor people are overrunning my vineyards," made her uneasy. She read it twice, then set the message to fire with an incantation. The paper disappeared in a puff of smoke. "Well," Mildred said, picking up her fork and setting her troubled thoughts of Evelyn aside, "I believe we have our 25th birthdays to celebrate tonight, don't we? Let's have Charles bring up the cake and change the frosting to yellow. Evelyn isn't here to demand to be purple, so let's take advantage of it." All right, we did it. We have like 8 minutes to go, and I'm all done with the chapters for today. I have about an hour of recording time every day, which makes it really fun. We get to hang out for an hour every day. So thanks so much for coming. I won't be back till Monday because I don't do it on the weekends when my kids are home. It's a lot easier that way. So I'll see you Monday, 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, and hopefully I will see you again. Thanks, everybody. Bye. See if I can actually end it.